Well, as you know, the answer is hardly ever. And if we do tell them to stop or we do criticize them, we do it with very vague language because we never really want to get too tough on them. And it's just the way it operates. I mean, the Israelis can do pretty much anything they want, especially when it comes to the Palestinians. I think if you're talking about Israel dealing with China, you're outside the region, then the United States has a bit of leverage. But if you're talking about inside the region and you're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, Israel can do pretty much anything it wants. And by the way, with regard to Iran, just to talk about the external environment and how the Israelis deal with their external environment, it's quite clear that the United States does not want to get involved in a war with Iran. And now on 2 occasions, the Israelis have taken military measures that were designed to drag us into a war with Iran. And we were unable to prevent that from happening. And once it did happen, once, the attack on April 1st took place, you remember that's when they hit the Iranian embassy in Damascus. And then on July 31st, when they took out Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. In both of those cases, we did not condemn Israel for what they did. And this is just, normal behavior on our part.
Do you expect a significant or a pinprick or none retaliation from Iran for the Israeli assassination in Tehran?
Well, the Iranians have said that there's going to be a significant response, and I will take them at their word. It is possible that they will change their mind. There's no question that the Americans have been going to enormous lengths to get them to limit the attack. And it may be that they've figured out that there are good reasons to limit the attack in significant ways. I don't know what those are, but they have said that they're going to come full force. They're really going to slam Israel. And I would think that that's true. And by the way, you want to remember that they're not the only actor that's coming after Israel. Hezbollah is coming after Israel too. They've promised that. You want to remember that there were twin assassinations here.
Right.
The Israelis assassinated a Hezbollah leader in southern Beirut on July 30th. And the next day, July 31st, they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Right? And by the way, the next day, on August 1st, they announced that Mohammed Deif, who was the military leader that they had claimed to assassinate on July 13th, they announced on August 1st that he was dead. So if you think about it, what they've done here is on July 30th, assassinated one leader in southern Beirut. On July 31st, they assassinated another leader in Tehran. And then on August 1st, they announced that the earlier killing had been successful. And what the Israelis are doing, and you don't see much discussion of this in the media, or at least in the mainstream media, what the Israelis are doing is they're pursuing a decapitation strategy. They're basically betting that they can kill the leadership of these various opposing organizations, and that will produce some sort of meaningful military victory. For that, this is a delusion. We have a whole literature on decapitation strategies. You kill one leader and they just bring in another leader. And the idea that that new leader is going to make peace with Israel is not a serious argument. But why are they pursuing a decapitation strategy? Why are they doing this? It's because they really don't have an alternative. They have no way out of the mess that they're in. That's true in Gaza, and it's true with regard to Hezbollah, Iran, and Hamas more generally.
I'm going to ask you in a minute about animosity in the region generated by Prime Minister Netanyahu's government. But first, I want you to listen to a statement made on August 5th, so just 4 days ago, by the Turkish foreign minister.
It is no longer acceptable for America to try to sweep aside and mitigate every evil Israel does. Let them heed our warnings. I say this as the children of the region, as the people of the region. The emotional atmosphere the region is going through, the psychological state of the people, the images of massacres they see on the screen every day, the fact that no help is being extended to the helpless Palestinians. And in the face of this, Muslim countries are constantly being lectured on other unnecessary issues, has long since exceeded the limits of tolerance in terms of democracy and human rights.
What, if anything, do you think Turkey will do? What pressures are there from the street on the Turkish government?
Judge, let me make a quick point here, just a more general point.
Sure.
Very important to understand that Turkey is probably the one country in the region, except for maybe Iran, where the leadership is as critical of Israel as the public is. As we've talked about before, in most Arab countries, and this is certainly true in Egypt and Jordan, there is not significant criticism from the top regarding Israeli behavior. And if you go to the street, there is huge anger towards Israel. And the elites in countries like Jordan and Egypt are doing everything they can to make sure that the volcano doesn't explode and they don't get pushed out of office. Turkey, on the other hand, is a case where the elites, this is Erdogan and his foreign minister, as we just heard, are as enraged and as angry about what's going on with regard to Israel and also with regard to the United States. You do not want to underestimate the anti-Americanism inside of Turkey today. It is off the charts because of what's happening in Gaza. But anyway, the Turkish government and Erdogan in particular has said that if the Israelis go to war in Lebanon, that Turkey will come in and Turkey will join the fight. Now, the question is, will they actually do that? Back to the question you were asking me about Iran. Will Iran actually attack Israel? And as I said to you there, it's hard to believe they won't after they said they would. And I sort of come to the same conclusion with regard to Turkey. The Turkish government has said that if the Israelis go into Lebanon, Turkey will come in to help the Lebanese.
And if Turkey helps the Lebanese and the United States helps the IDF, what do you have? Two NATO countries fighting each other?
Yeah. I mean, as you know, you can tell all sorts of nightmare scenarios about how this escalates. And I don't know exactly what Iran will do. I don't know exactly what Hezbollah will do. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, let's assume that Hezbollah and Iran both attack Israel. And let's assume that those attacks are reasonably limited, right? Not massive attacks. Question then is, what will the Israelis do? Will the Israelis limit their retaliation? I doubt that. I think the Israelis place a very high premium on escalation dominance. They've always thought that the best way to deter their adversaries was to make sure that as you went up the escalation ladder, they dominated the other side. So one could argue that even if Iran and Lebanon launch rather selective attacks at Israel, that the Israelis will go back at them really hard. And if that happens, then the question is, what will Hezbollah do? What will Iran do? And to go to the subject we're talking about, what will Turkey do? What will the Russians do? And these are all open questions because none of us, can say for sure, exactly what's going on here and how will this play itself out.
But do you expect that the Kremlin would aid Iran in some way? We know that it has already delivered defensive weaponry. It has already delivered, I'm not sure what you call it, some sort of electronic devices that render the internet useless in Israel. President Putin has made it clear whose side he'd be on. Let me take this even farther. Do you think the Chinese will get involved?
No, I don't think the Chinese will get involved. I think the Russians are already involved in the ways that you described. They're giving, ground-based air defense systems. They're giving radars. They're giving jamming equipment to the Iranians. How much, we don't know. There are some people who posit that given how late in the game the Iranians are getting this equipment, it's likely that the Russians will be manning the equipment. That you couldn't train the Iranians up quick enough to use this new equipment. I don't know whether that's true, but it would not be surprising if the Russians actually help the Iranians. I mean, you want to remember, we're helping the Israelis in this expected fight, and we helped them in the big fight on April 14th when Iran attacked the last time. So the Russians could be very well involved in the fighting in a very sort of subtle way. Who knows? But they're already committed to helping Iran. I mean, what we're doing here with the Israelis is that we're driving the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and the North Koreans closer and closer together. It's the axis of resistance on a global scale. And there's no evidence that this is going to change anytime soon. And this is certainly not in our interest. And as I've said to you before, you want to remember that if the Israelis slam Iran, they are going to give Iran very powerful incentives to acquire nuclear weapons. The Iranians are not far from the point where they have nuclear weapons, and we should be doing everything we can, and the Israelis should be doing everything they can to make sure they don't cross the nuclear threshold. But given our actions, and especially given Israel's actions, we're giving Iran very powerful incentives to acquire nuclear weapons. And the question is, will the Russians help us prevent that? I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it.
Are you talking about Iran developing nuclear weapons or getting them from their friends in Pakistan?
No, developing them. We worry about the Saudis getting nuclear weapons from the Pakistanis. We believe the Saudis gave the Pakistanis monetary assistance to acquire the bomb, and that the quid pro quo is that China will give nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia if Saudi Arabia needs those weapons. You want to remember that Saudi Arabia has said that if Iran gets nuclear weapons, they will get nuclear weapons. And that's where the Pakistani connection comes in. I'm not saying that would happen, that Pakistan would give them a nuclear weapon. But in the case of Iran, Iran has a very sophisticated nuclear infrastructure, and they're enriching uranium up to 60%. And that's just a hop, skip, and a jump away from enriching uranium up to 90%, which is weapons grade uranium. So the Iranians are not far from the point where they would have sufficient weapons grade uranium to develop at least one, maybe two or three bombs. And it would not take them that long to do it. And it would be extremely difficult for us and for the Israelis to prevent that. So what we want to do is we don't want to give the Iranians an incentive to cross the nuclear threshold, to become a nuclear weapon state. And the best way to do that is not to attack them, because if you attack a state with your military forces, you give that state a very powerful incentive to acquire what we call the ultimate deterrent, i.e. nuclear weapons. So all I'm saying here is that as this plays out now, everybody should keep in mind that it has consequences for whether or not Iran goes nuclear.
Mearsheimer, do you think that the apparent forever wars, I think he used the phrase, Israel must live on the edge of a sword, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is threatening, will have the effect of uniting or unifying the liberal secular Jews and the Zionist fanatics in Israel?
Well, I think that this is a very tricky question. I mean, there's no question that almost everybody in Israel has come to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, that they're doomed to be in a permanent state of emergency, and the threat of war from their neighbors and from the Palestinians is not going away anytime soon. So I think there's unanimity on that dimension of the question that you're asking. Nevertheless, there are significant disagreements inside of Israel on how to deal with that threat environment. And you see it today with regard to the question of a ceasefire in Gaza. There are just lots of people who believe that the Israelis should accept the ceasefire. And of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu disagrees with that, at least so far. So there are, real differences in that regard. The same thing is true with regard to Gaza. There are a lot of Israelis who tend to be in the center who do not want to remain in Gaza. They think that it's a hornet's nest and Israel should get out. But then you have all sorts of people on the right who would like to kill all the Palestinians in Gaza, ethnically cleanse it, and build settlements in Gaza because they think Gaza is part of the Holy Land.
How do you view everything that's happened lately? The videos of torture, the IDF torturers being arrested, and then the beneficiaries of a jailbreak, the government agreeing not to prosecute them, the long distance assassinations in Tehran and in Beirut, language from the finance minister Smotrich like we should really just starve these people to death, but the world wouldn't let us do it. The Knesset debating whether or not the torturers should have carte blanche, that is, no prosecution for what they do, an actual legal immunity. The Knesset debating whether or not the jailers can just put a bullet in the head of the Palestinian prisoners on the theory that they need more bedroom. All of this. How do you view this? Where do you see this going?
Well, I think you have to separate what's going on inside Israel from how Israel deals with its external environment. And to start by talking about what's happening inside Israel, as I've long argued, Israel is an apartheid state. And to run an apartheid state, you have to turn the Palestinians into subhumans, or you have to treat the Palestinians like they're subhumans. They're animals. And when you run an apartheid state, you end up brutalizing in the most horrible ways the victims. The second class or third class people who live in your society. And this has been happening inside of Israel for a long time. The Israelis have been torturing prisoners, doing terrible things to the Palestinians for a long, long time. And what happened on October 7th is that those terrible practices that the Israelis employ against the Palestinians were ramped up. And what you see today is that the Palestinians are being treated in the most horrendous ways. And most people in the West cannot believe that the Israelis are doing this because it's so out of line with what you would expect from a liberal democracy. But if you look at how the Israelis themselves think about it, it's quite remarkable how much support there is for this behavior. Channel 12 in Israel recently ran a survey asking Israelis whether they thought it was okay for an Israeli person to rape a terrorist. Okay, is it okay for an Israeli to rape a terrorist? 47% of Israelis, according to Channel 12 in Israel, 47% of Israelis said it's okay, and 42% said it's not okay. What does this say about Israeli society? This is horrible. But that's what you're dealing with. And by the way, there's a new report out from B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group, called Welcome to Hell, which lays out in deep detail what has been happening in Israeli prisons to Palestinians since October 7th. And that report, by the way, makes it clear that what has been happening since October 7th may be an ramped up version of what was happening before October 7th, but never lose sight of the fact that those prisoners were being treated in the most brutal ways before October 7th as well.